We've seen cards over the years that are desert-oriented, like Desert, for example, or Hazazon Shaper of Sand, which was a mythic that came out only a couple of years back and did have a lot of synergy with deserts, but there haven't exactly been a ton of cards that actually make Desert itself playable as a theme to build around, I suppose, which is why the brand new Desert Bloom Commander deck is actually really exciting to me, because I think it's got a really unique take on what you can do with deserts and will also allow you to make some interesting card combinations. So let's take a look at the deck and see how good the new cards are, and if this could bloom into something better than expected. Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for being here. As always, if you do enjoy the content, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, and I love to interact in the comments, so, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the deck, and whether or not it's one you might be buying. But we're going to kind of jump right into this here, and obviously, as we discussed in the previous video with the, I can't remember the name, the Most Wanted Commander deck, there are 10 new cards, including the Two-Face Commander, so there's 10 cards to look at here, and we're going to just start right off with Yuma, Proud Protector, which is the face commander for the deck, and it is 5 red, green, white, legendary human ranger. It costs 1 less to cast for each land in your graveyard. When it attacks or enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land to draw a card. Whenever a desert is put into your graveyard from anywhere, create a 4/2 green plant warrior creature token with reach. So the cost is a little high at the beginning, but this deck's going to be based around wanting to get stuff in the grave. Obviously, there are plenty of cards that allow you to mill lands, including cards that are actually getting reprints in this deck. So doing that with a strategy in mind is certainly not going to be as difficult as it may seem on the surface, but it can also, fuel lands in the graveyard with sacrificing, and then obviously cards that will bring lands back. Cards like Life from the Loam and things to that effect will work really well with this commander. And since you're playing green and can ramp, you can ideally get lands, out quickly. With fetch lands, you have ways to get lands in grave while not actually sacrificing your land presence on the board. But when you do put a desert in your graveyard, you get that 4/2 token with reach. Not terrible. I mean, there's a lot of things going with this guy that I think makes him really interesting, especially with the fetch lands, and you'd probably even play some of the lesser fetch lands just because you want to be able to get things in grave as quickly as possible. So your Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wild, stuff like that might actually have a place in here depending on how the actual build comes along with it. And I think playing deserts with it are really going to make it extremely strong, because you are going to be able to just generate a bunch of those tokens. And I think, unlike with the Most Wanted deck, this face commander is definitely the better of the two. Now, we also have another commander in the deck that is an option, of course, and that one is going to be Kiri the Talented Sprout. So this is 1 red, green, white, legendary plant druid. This is other plants and tree folk you control get +2/+0. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, return target plant, tree folk, or land card from your graveyard to your hand. So very, very different. Obviously, this doesn't care about deserts at all. It's kind of interesting because obviously it does buff specific plants, tree folk. So I would see where playing this in the deck using the face commander as your primary, win condition, if you will, would certainly help, because you can buff your stuff up, and being able to get things back after, so it's the post-combat main phase. So after your combat, before your turn ends, you get a tree, folk, a plant, or a land back to the hand. Being able to recur your fetch lands is nice and plays really well into the strategy. I do think that this card is decent as a card. I don't think it's the better of the two commanders, but who knows? Maybe people will find other ways to make it a little bit more playable. I just think it doesn't inherently do a ton for you when it comes out right away, and it's better as a complementary piece to an existing strategy than, the other way around. That's just my opinion, so you guys feel differently. Certainly, let me know which of the two you think is going to be the one to play. Cactus Preserve is a land desert that enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. So it's a reflecting pool there. And you can pay 3 mana to have it become an XX green plant with reach, where X is the greatest mana value among your commanders. Now, that, I believe the way that's worded, and I could be wrong, but I believe it doesn't matter where the commander is for calculating that. So if you are playing the primary commander for this deck, he is an 8 mana cost, even though he is obviously easier to bring out. So an 8/8 with reach that you could make a land into is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Not to mention, there are obviously ways to buff that up, and it's decent, especially because it's a desert. The fact that it comes into play tapped is definitely a little bit annoying. I guess I get it because you could play it and buff it up, but I don't know. I don't think it would have been too much if they just made it such that it would just, come in Untapped, I think that would have been okay. It's definitely desert specific. Or if you're playing a commander with a crazy high cost, I guess there are ways to make it work, but it's not like a generically great land. But if you're playing on a budget, I could see where it would work in other decks too. Now, Catastrophe Prospecting is X red sorcery. It deals X damage to each creature. For each mana from a desert spent to cast this spell, create a tapped creature token. So, a slightly worse Blasphemous Act, but also kind of better because if you're playing all deserts, or you have a lot of deserts, you can get a ton of treasures for this, basically casting it almost for free. But I think that's really going to be limited to desert-specific decks versus just generically being a good board wipe. So it's a good card within this deck, but I don't think it's a good card overall, if that makes sense. But obviously, having another board wipe is solid, but it's really only going to be something that you want to play in decks that care about the, X in the mana value, or, just deserts all over the place to get any real use out of it. Sand Scout is 1 and a white, and it's a human scout creature. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for a desert and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Whenever one or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, create a 1/1 red-green-white Sand Warrior creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it's a Knight of the White Orchid for deserts, which I guess is okay. Obviously, it comes into play tapped. I think most deserts enter tapped anyway, with a few exceptions, but it's not bad. Obviously, if you're playing a desert-focused deck, you understand why you'd want to bring it out. And then being able to get a token when a land is put in a grave certainly synergizes well with the commander. Using a fetch land or milling lands in general, you can do this once on your turn, once on the opponent's turn. A little slow, but I guess, you got to be somewhat cautious with the ability to just generate a bunch. They're trying to be a little bit helpful with ramp without making it too much. And obviously getting those Sand Warrior tokens are going to, have good things with other, good synergy with other cards. And the thing about it is that it's just not that great outside of that strategy. So it's very good with fetch lands. It's very good with the commander. But it's not generically good. So I think that seems to be like a recurring theme with this particular deck. Is like a lot of the cards in it are good in their own deck, but we didn't get a lot of great generics up to this point. Now, Angel of Indemnity might be the exception to the rule. It's 5 and 1 white creature, Angel Warrior with flying and lifelink. When it ETBs, you can return target permanent with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then it has Encore 6 white. Encore, if you're unfamiliar, you exile it from the grave, create a token that attacks each opponent this turn if able, and it gains haste. So you could essentially make 3 tokens, get 3 cards back from the graveyard, and the cool part about that is you can bring back the fetch lands with it, or just other creatures in general, so that Encore is really strong. It just costs a good bit. But this card, there's going to be more than one deck that can play that. Akali is a deck that comes to mind that could probably utilize this. Granted, a lot of permanents, that the deck plays are typically higher mana cost, but even being able to use this to maybe bring your commander back or to bring back some other lower cost things. Angels, I think it's Giada, might be able to make use of it. This is a generically strong card in certain strategies beyond just this one, and it's definitely good. Obviously, the Encore effect is awesome, but it costs a lot, so you got to make it work. It's a good card. I think it's going to see some play. It's sort of like, it's not amazing, but it stands out versus some of the other stuff that we got in here overall. Now, Rumbleweed is 10 and a green. It costs 1 less to cast for each land in your graveyard. It has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. When it enters battlefield, other creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain Trample until end of turn. Someone made a reference to Crater Hoof Behemoth being somewhat similar to this. Obviously, it's definitely pretty good. It can win the game if your deck is built around this. Crater Hoof has haste, this doesn't, so that's a big difference. But this does have Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. And the fact that you're obviously going to be playing this where you can get a lot of lands in grave. You can really play this for almost free if you're playing your cards right, and then just kind of buff everything up and swing for a lot of damage. Arguably one of the strongest cards in the deck itself because of its application in a lot of different places. But if your deck doesn't have a way of getting lands in grave quickly, or you don't play a lot of fetch lands, it's gonna be kind of meh because it costs quite a bit, and it doesn't do as much for you as, say, Crater Hoof would in terms of advancing if you don't get that cost down. So it's really good, and it's definitely a card that will see a lot of play. It just depends on where where you want to slot it and if it makes sense for your deck. Obviously, in this deck, even if you buy it and upgrade it, it's going to be really good. Embrace the Unknown is 2 and a red sorcery with exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. So it has Retrace, and Retrace basically, as a mechanic I actually had to look up while I was making the video. I'm not 100% familiar with it. You can cast it from your graveyard by discarding a land, so it obviously plays really well into what the deck is looking to do. It is a Ren's Resolve that costs a little bit more, but is reusable, so it's pretty good in, you know, this deck, but also really good in decks that want to get lands in grave or, you know, any extra cards in hand. I mean, it's definitely solid. I think it could have probably cost the same as Ren's Resolve, but then it would be strictly... Yeah, I got it. It's hard to say. I'm kind of like thinking this like live on the spot, but it's a good card, and it has a lot of potential if you care about getting lands in grave or want to set up for future turns, or just in general want to have access to resources on more turns than just the turn you play it. And we got Dune Chanter. This is 2 and a green. It is a creature plant druid with reach. Lands you control and lands you own that aren't on the battlefield are deserts in addition to their other types. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and then you can tap it to mill 2 cards and gain a life for each land card milled this way. Undoubtedly the best card out of the new cards in this deck, without a doubt. It is extremely good. It actually might single-handedly make this desert strategy viable, at least within, you know, the confines of what you're looking to do here. It's similar to, I always forget the name, the Dryad, the one that makes all decks, all lands you control everywhere, basic lands. This is making things deserts. So now you can fetch deserts from everywhere. Your fetch lands become deserts, so you can get fetch lands right out of the deck. It does turn all of your lands into lands of any color. There's a lot of things to like about this card's construction and sort of what it does, both for this deck or if you just wanted to play deserts elsewhere. You know what I mean? There's so much you can really do with that card. I think it's really strong, and it's a pretty damn good card for that purpose. And finally, the last new card in the deck is Eventual Regrowth. It is 4 green. It is a sorcery. Return up to 3 target lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tap, then create that many 4/2 green plant warrior creature tokens with reach. It has flashback 6 green, so you can cast it from your graveyard for 8. Then basically play it again. Obviously, fetch lands, I've said it 1,000 times in this video, that's going to be really where this card shines more than anything else. Being able to bring them back, and then of course you get the tokens, and you can send them to grave and keep generating token spam. What I really like about this deck as a whole is that I just think it has a really fun, unique approach, and it really does give the desert mechanic a lot of bite, I guess is the best way to say it. Like, in other words, these new cards really allow that to expand beyond what it was before, and in combination with other good desert cards already, or cards that care about deserts, you can really make something work here. So I think this one is really more exciting for me than the Most Wanted, and I think that's more than anything else because it's unique, but it also feels like it could be viable, and I think that's kind of what you're looking for when it comes to like getting a commander deck. Could you buy this and make good upgrades to it? Absolutely. And I know it's got a couple decent reprints as well. Oracle of Moldiah is one of them. Pretty good card. I mean, there's definitely some things in here that are a couple bucks that'll be nice to get back as, you know, a little bit of added value. Or I think it's Raminep Excavator is another one that's pretty good, and that card doesn't exactly have too many prints. So you got things to look forward to. It's a really neat concept, and there are some cards that will definitely be playable in more than just this deck. But overall, it looks like as a commander deck itself, it could be really fun. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about this deck as a whole. Definitely look forward to hearing from you guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.